You can stir it up, Jansen.
Oh, maybe, yeah.
Well, good afternoon, Father's House Church. It is so good to see you. We are here with another episode of Beyond the Message. I am your host, Gordon, and I'm joined by Pastor Josh. Pastor.
Say hi.
Oh, hey. Sorry.
Hi,
Yeah.
Pastor Luke.
Hello.
And our speaker from this Sunday, Pastor CJ.
What's going on?
Welcome
Yes,
to the
sir.
show. It's great to have you here.
Thank you. Thank you.
Did we have last week off? Or was that just me?
That was just you.
No.
Carrie.
How'd it go?
I thought it went pretty good. Me, Carrie, and Jenny talked about the sermon. What was the sermon? So focused on today's sermon.
Worship.
Oh, worship. Yes, thank you. Thank you.
That
Yeah.
was a really good description of how it went last week. How'd it go? We talked about last week's sermon.
Yes, we did.
Sounds
Unforgettable.
like the summary of the whole podcast.
Exactly.
Yeah.
There you go, Josh. Somebody's listening. But today we're talking about not really, giving, but I got to ask CJ,
Yeah.
as a new pastor, especially at a church, how daunting is it when the first real message you're asked to give is on giving?
Yeah, tell him, CJ.
Tell him the full story,
Tell
Pastor.
the full story.
Tell
Yeah. So full story. Here's what happened. In the meeting with a few of the staff members a couple weeks back, Pastor Pierre walks in and asked me to speak on what I thought was giving, but apparently it wasn't giving, and I didn't find that out until after I preached the first message.
Oh.
At the 9 a.m. and I'm in the back room with Josh, and Josh is like, "So CJ, did you have any follow-up conversations with Pastor Pierre after?" I'm like, no. He said, "Oh, because he actually asked you to speak on Thanksgiving."
That makes more sense.
Not giving. I'm like, oh, I could have sworn it was giving. So with that being said, though, pretty daunting.
Yeah.
But exciting nonetheless.
Yeah, well,
What kind of financial trouble is this church in? They got the new guy talking about giving.
I know it's always a tough one to do, I'm sure, but I thought you did great. I
thank you.
really enjoyed the perspective that you brought to it. Very challenging message. I was very challenged by it. Let us know in the comments, people watching, what challenged you the most in the message.
Yeah.
Maybe Luke or Josh, anything that stuck out to you as far as the message or essentially what I really appreciated is, it's not the things we give, it's what we're afraid to be giving. And that was just such a challenging kind of takeaway.
I thought that was
No, I'm going to talk.
Yeah, please do.
God. I thought the standards and the seasons was I loved that part.
Yeah.
God doesn't change his standards based on your season.
Yeah.
Thought that was great. Go ahead.
Luke, are you ready to share with the...
I was ready to share. I hope that we talk more about that, Josh.
I'm
this
sure we will.
podcast.
Yeah.
Well, let's talk about that right now.
Let's talk about it right
'Cause
now. Then we'll go to me if we
Okay.
still have time.
Yeah, because I think that, really that ties into so much of what we've been talking about lately. And really, the end of, is this the end of the Together series or is
Yes.
it? Yeah.
Yeah.
We start Christmas this
Right.
weekend.
So, as we're ending this whole series that we've been doing on sort of refocusing on what are we doing as a church and what is God calling us to do, and just how much it's been repeated, the truth of the word, resting in that word, digging into who God is, knowing who God is. That was such a great way to make that point, is that the standards never change. And that is such a tempting thing, I think, for all of us to do. And you kind of captured it, I thought, really perfectly. Oh, well, we justify it, This is, you want me to get, like how my favorite part of that whole part was where you were like, I know you're God, but that's my son or whatever, and just,
yeah.
it's so easy to do that with the things that we have made into those idols. And it's so easy to forget that God calls us and that we need to trust him with those things, but not let it be something that owns us, essentially.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I was thinking about how, that cliche phrase, we're created in God's image, but we want to create God in our image.
Yeah.
We want to shift his standards for our season. And Josh, you'll have to remind me, just during lunch this earlier today, you said something along the line, and I forgot what we were talking about, but we said something like, no, we've progressed as a people, as a human. It was a joke.
Yeah. I don't remember.
Man, it was really funny,
There was
though.
a lot of jokes. So.
I mean, you got all the jokes. But it was something silly like, like we shouldn't have to use our hands anymore. We have utensils. Like we've progressed as humankind. And I think sometimes we can superimpose that idea on Scripture.
Well, that
and
was
God's
the conversation
standards.
around Carson basically saying they used to send letters for chess or something like that. And I was like, yeah, we used to marry our cousins, is what I said.
Yes. Yeah. And to both things, like we don't have to mail letters anymore, nor do
Yeah.
we have to marry our cousins anymore.
Exactly.
Because we've progressed as a species.
Yeah.
But God's standards don't change.
Yeah.
But I think sometimes, and you would know maybe more so than us because you're well studied in the culture with the next generation that's coming up, that in a lot of ways is finding new ways to conform God into their image, change his standards to meet their needs. Like, where do you see that in culture and with this generation?
Yeah, I think it's super tricky. I think it's one of those things that if you don't pay close attention to, you'll find yourself thinking you're upholding a standard, but you're really not. And so I don't know. And even I tell people all the time, like when I speak, I preach the message to myself first. And so it's like I had to catch myself in it. As I'm thinking through, it's like where have I switched the standard again just to fit my season. I think this generation is it makes it so easy to do. We talked before when we did the IG live how this generation thinks it's on them to fix things. It's on them to save the world kind of thing. And so and with that comes just them thinking the way things used to be or the way things were done in the past, like it has to be changed. And so with that mindset, it's easy for this generation, like if they're not careful, it's like sometimes what we do, they lower the standard to make it easier for them to reach. And so I learned this thing before when it comes to lowering standards and upholding it. It's like you hold your hand up, right? And you hold your hand up. And it's like you hold your hand up, and what people do in order to make people feel like inclusive, and that's the big thing with this generation. In order to make people feel included and inclusive, what they do is it's like, you know what, if the standard is up here, maybe it's too high for them to reach, so we'll lower it, and so everyone could be able to hit. But I think what we do is we take out the necessity or need and dependence on God when we do that, because again, even in that scripture that I spoke from, it talked about with man this is impossible, but with God all things are possible. And so I think sometimes with God's standards, since it feels so impossible, people feel like, well, maybe something is wrong with the standard. And it's like, no, the standard, there's nothing wrong with the standard. It's who are we relying on to reach that standard? And at some point, when you're following Jesus, it's important for you to remember, listen, this was not meant for you to do alone. And so at some point, like, when do you reach back and rely on God to help you uphold the standard kind of thing? And so I'll shut up. I'll hand it back over.
That's good. Hey, I was talking. That reminds me. I was talking with a friend this morning. He's doing somewhat of a long distance relationship, and he's a believer and has grown up a Christian, but she is not. And they have a really seems like a pretty healthy relationship, but because their foundations aren't matched and their values aren't the same and their standard isn't the same, they keep running up against different issues, but the same underlying issue.
Right.
And I was talking with him this morning and just asking questions around that. And I said, at what point do you think that you are going to get sick of running up against this different problems with the same problem? And the fact is, you two are. I think you used this before in one of your previous relationships. Like you're on the same channel.
Two different channels.
Two different channels.
You got to turn off the TV.
You got to turn off the TV.
Yeah.
And if in this case, her, because we know that Jesus is the way, the truth, the life. Nobody else gets to the Father. If she doesn't change the station to his station, like he's going to have to turn off the TV, or he's going to have a very difficult road ahead.
Wow.
Yeah.
And what I hear him wrestling with is he, for the sake of love, willing to change his standard
Yeah.
to stay together? And that's tough. Yeah. It's easy for us maybe to sit here and be like, bro, turn off the TV.
Yeah.
Well, when you're in it,
Well, I
that's
think
tough.
I think that is the tough part, because this is the kind of stuff we're talking about. It's easy to academically kind of know, like, yeah, of course, God's got to be the number one. But unfortunately, that change, like, it's only easy after God's changed you. And that change only happens after you walk through it. God doesn't change you and then you say, like, oh yeah, we're done. You have to walk through it. And then afterwards you see, like, God's changed me. I'm okay with what happened. And, like, it's natural now to act in this new way. But unfortunately, when you're going into that situation like that, it doesn't matter how much you know, and that's what's so challenging about this message, because it's like, yeah, I know everything you're saying. I'm like, yeah, I know, but okay, now do it. Stop, stop worrying about how much money you have, or stop worrying about whatever your idol is. Well, no, I'm not. I can't do that. I know I should, but it's hard to do it because you have to actually walk it out. And that's where the faith comes in, the trust comes in. So I sympathize. I think this is one of the most, like, it's easy to know what to do, but to do it is so hard, because it really does require that full surrender without the benefit of the change that will eventually come with it and through it.
Yeah, and I think even in the scripture in Mark, where I came from, to your point about knowing it, Jesus told the man, you know the commandments. Like,
Right.
You know it. But then again, like you said, it's just a difference when it goes from that head knowledge to actually living it out. And sometimes I heard this before, like, if you only know it but don't live it, and you just know about it,
Right.
you don't really know it. And I think that's why it was so important the way Jesus gave it to the guy, the way Jesus introduced this last commandment that he hadn't really covered at first. There is one thing, and then proceeded to show him in order to, I guess, make him have to walk this thing out now.
Right.
Again, which is always tougher. It's one of those easier said than done kind of things, and you don't know till push comes to shove. So, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was interesting that, and I love that story, and you did such a good job. And I want to, at some point, hopefully we can talk about the link to the 10 Commandments, the one that was left out. Like, that's what Jesus was getting to. That was brilliant. And I wrote it down in my notes this way: the one thing that you won't give actually means everything. Mm-hmm. And, the rich young ruler, he walked away. How did it describe it? He walked away like sorrowful.
Yeah,
something like that.
It's actually the only person who came to Jesus in the scriptures looking for something and left disappointed.
Yeah.
The only person.
Yeah.
Wow.
But I do wonder if, I think sometimes we interpret scripture incorrectly by thinking that if he was like, yes, I'm willing to do that, all of a sudden he's going to give away everything with a full smile on his face. Just, I am so joyful that I just get to all of a sudden, like this, flip it. Like, do you think that there's still would have been, you think when he actually had to write the check, his face still would have fell a little bit, but he still would have went through with it?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I think we sometimes remove the humanity from some of these stories.
Yeah.
Well, I would say yes, and I know you kind of talked about that at sort of towards the end. Like, well, okay, you don't have to like it, but trust in God and do it. And I think, is it Zacharias who falls out of the tree? Who's up in the tree?
Zacchaeus.
Mm-hmm. I can't imagine he was feeling very good when he did walk it out, but at the same time, he's walking out repentance, and there's obviously going to be some guilt in there, and you're feeling bad. So yeah, I would say it's definitely not a pleasant all the time experience.
And I also think it's important, like you said, the humanity of it. Like, it's a very real feeling, right? Sometimes people mistake people who obey God, and that's another point that I talked about too, the whole trust and obey thing. Like,
that's what I meant.
Yeah, like sometimes God is, God gives us a command, and a lot of times we either can follow it by trust, like, God, I trust you and I'm fully for it, or sometimes it's like, God, I'm gonna just obey you. I mean, I don't get it. It doesn't feel the best, but I'm gonna obey you and go ahead and do this. And so, yeah, I think a lot of times that obedience comes with, whew, God. All right, this is a tough one, but like Jesus, we talk about Jesus. Not my will, but your will be done. If there's any way, let this cup pass from me. But God, anyway, I mean, not my will, but your will be done. And a lot of times that's what it comes down to. So, yeah, I definitely think, and I talked about it even with my move to Rochester. And I use that same example of like my face falling. When it's like, God, like, all right, I feel like this is where you're leading me. And I do trust you. But, and again, like I said, we could be honest, it often starts with us is like, the examples like, God, you're my God, but this, or you're my God, and I hear you. Trust me. Can we reason? Yeah. Like, do you feel me on this part? But again, it's ultimately, I think God is ultimately looking for obedience, and even obedience will show where your heart is. Sometimes, and like, I'll stop. But yeah,
you keep going, man. You're doing good. You're nailing it.
You're doing great.
Yeah.
What was it like? You got into it a little bit on a couple different occasions at the Instagram Live that we did for the parents a little bit this past weekend. But what was it like between you and Cassie?
Yeah.
When you were like, hey, I think we might.
Yeah. Josh should tell you this because we were in contact with Josh a lot. Cassie was probably 10 months ahead of me. With this.
Easily. Yeah.
That's usually a good sign, actually.
It is.
Our wives always know before we do.
Absolutely, and I'm learning that. I've only been married for 5 years. Definitely learning that. But she was like 10 months ahead of me. Yeah. She was really waiting on me. And again, and like you said, it goes back to the human nature. A lot of times we want to be sure.
Yep.
A lot of times we want to be certain, and that even certainty can be an idol. You know, and we don't even recognize it. Like, I trust you, but I just want to be certain. Like what if I do this?
Yep.
And it doesn't go right? But then what I learned even with that is, or what God even made real to me was like, what if it doesn't all go right? Would you not obey me? Do you only obey me on a condition that it all goes right?
Yeah.
Like, what do you do then?
Or did you miss me if it doesn't go right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Did you miss me if it doesn't go right? And so a lot of that went part of it too, and just thinking through God, like, and again, this is all real feelings that we feel. God, I have a family. Like, God, me reasoning with God, you know what my heart is. Like, God, you know I follow you. There was a time before I was working in the corporate field. I was working at JP Morgan Chase, and I was a project manager. And things were good and things were fine, and I felt God leading me away. And I was like, God, like, whatever you say, like, I'll do it. There was another point where I was working in CBS, the television station in New York, doing well, and I felt God asking me to leave. I'm like, all right, God, like, I'll leave. So when it came to this, I'm like, God, like, you can't, like, you know I'll leave. Like, it's not even about that. And God was like, and that's where he showed me about the point about, would you do it again? Yeah. Would you do it again? And so I think a lot of times we try to lean on our obedience of yesterday. I was obedient last time. Like, isn't that enough credit? Yeah. God didn't build up enough credit points with you. And again, I feel like it's the thing with the rich young rulers. Like, God, I obeyed all of those. Like, I did all. Like, it's really is one thing gonna hold me up? But again, it's the obedience. It's the obedience. If God asks you to do it 10 times and you do it 9, partial obedience is disobedience.
That's what I tell my kids.
Or
delayed obedience is disobedience.
Anything but doing exactly what was asked is 100%. And
I love that. And I know in my own life, I resonate a lot with, I want to be responsible and I want to make a good decision. And I actually use the word wise It's like that Christian, you just kind of wrap disobedience or delay I just want to make a wise decision. God, you've trusted me with so much. I just want to be a good steward. I don't think, all right, maybe I should. That's not right. Or maybe I'm missing here. That doesn't seem wise. Right? But the ways of the wise seem foolish to man.
Yeah. Right.
So it's like, it's tricky.
Yeah.
It's tricky.
And on the other end too, right? How many people are way too quick to be like, God's calling me to do this? Like, no, he's not, man.
Right.
So it's definitely a tough one, and wisdom is required. But at the same time, we can't become, I think we're hungry for, and you were kind of getting towards that, is we're almost hungry for complacency. Like we think like, oh, I've been delivered through this, so I'll just settle down here. And God's like, what are you doing? Keep moving.
Yeah.
And how easy it is for us to be in the new place, be like, oh, this is good. But God's like already 2 steps ahead of us, been calling us, like, come on, follow me. I've got more for you. And we always get caught up in the now versus the going. And Josh, you got anything? It sounds like you got.
No, I'm just listening. It was good.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't have too much to add to that. It was great. I mean, when it comes to, my dad always told me, don't worry about making the right decision. You just need to make your decisions right. Like, don't burn bridges. Don't make, like, your choices like an idiot. Like, make them right. Because you really have zero control over the extenuating circumstances in your life. Like, zero control.
Yeah.
Life's going to happen regardless of what we decide to do. There's certain things that are outside of your control.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it could stress you out if you try to always make the right choice. Just the right thing. It's like, well, I have no idea, but we're going to be confident in the choice that we're making. And if it falls on its face, well, God knows. So, I mean, yeah.
Well, I think, as we kind of keep talking about this, the thing that really stuck with me was how you were talking about sort of some of the other things. Because I think it's easy to point to money.
Yeah.
It's so easy because everybody wants money. We all want to be comfortable. But, the ones that really stuck with me were those like you were saying, like me time, like I CJ, I know we just sort of met, but so I have a 4-month-old daughter. I'm trying to finish a PhD. I work part-time and I help out here and do this podcast and stuff. My life is busy, I guess is all I'm trying to say. And it's, that has been so real to me in these last couple months of like, I just want to wake up in the morning, not have a crying baby, and just have like a pot of coffee and just sit there.
A whole pot of coffee.
Not a whole pot.
Not because I need it, because I can.
But it's like, but I've kind of caught myself, I was like, but you don't want to read your Bible during that time, do you? You just want to sit back and look on your phone or do whatever, know. And it's really been like, why are you not? And you kind of really challenged me with that of, why not? Why are you not giving him that time? And it's again something that we can know the importance of, but to really get through it. So, as you've been talking about kind of the decisions you made in coming here. And it sounds as if, and it seemed as if, like, this message really was coming from a place of recent experience. And, so how do you kind of get past that? How do you get through, when you're saying like, well, I know it, but how do you actually get into that? Like, I am just going to obey. I'm going to trust. Yeah. Even when because I think our nature is always going to pull us away. Yeah. We're always being distracted by our human nature, by temptations to just ignore God, essentially.
I think it's important. A couple of things, actually. One, I always told my wife, I pay attention to how God has moved in my life up until this point. Mm-hmm. And the Bible talks about if you're faithful over little, God will make you rule over much. And I feel like there's times, and I could never quite put my finger on it. But my wife, I've been with my wife. We've been married 5 years. We've been together. How long have we been together, babe? 14 years, something like that. And so she's been with me through different stages of my life. And so I told her that there was a time where I was working at a job at Starbucks. And I just felt, again, that there was a point where I felt God telling me to leave. And when I left, I told my wife, I said, I kind of feel like this is practice. I don't know. And I told her this years ago. Like, I feel like at some point God may ask me to do something like this on a bigger scale. I don't know what that looks like, but I kind of feel like this is what it was. And then when I was at JP Morgan and it happened, and I was at CBS and it happened, and it felt like each time there was a little bit more at stake. And so what I did was I told her I always kept like a notes in my head, but also like just notes kind of on paper. Like what was this like? What did that feel like? How do you feel now looking back? So one, I always kept notes on how God worked in my life in the past. But one of the biggest things is prayer beforehand and speaking to God. I told my wife there were times in my life where I would have not done something, or I would have been disobedient if I had not heard from God in the beginning. And so it's like God would kind of like tell me if there was something that was going to happen or whatever. I just kind of like pray, and God kind of like I'll read a scripture and it's like, all right, it's not going to be easy or whatever. And so when I get in it and it's not easy, I'm not shocked. Because God already kind of, and even he gives scriptures, you know, in this world there will be trouble, but take heart, I've overcome the world. And so scriptures like that. So I just learned really, it's important to write down what God said beforehand. And because at some point and even at Josh, I think Josh could even, I'm not even sure if I mentioned it to Josh, but even in making the decision to come here, and I was like, I need time to pray. And I told my wife, I'm like, listen, ministry is hard. Like, we've been doing it for a while. You understand ministry is hard. And at some point, you're going to come across a scenario or a situation or a moment where you need to know this is what God said.
Yeah.
Because if you don't know this is what God said, when you get there, you may abort ship. And it wasn't time to abort ship. Or that's not what God called you to do. So I got to know that what God said before this. And so that's another huge thing. Just being clear on what God said, writing down those scriptures, writing it down. So when you come across those moments, you're like, you know what? It's hard, but I'm going back to what God said. This is what he told me. And I'm just relying on that.
Yeah. Well, and that gets to, I mean, as Luke and Josh like to get on my case for, I always mention how important it is to read the Bible, you know, every episode. But
not because we disagree.
Well, I'm not saying it's because you disagree. I'm just introducing him to all of our little in things here. But yeah, and I think that's completely true. And it even gets back to the beginning of your message when you were talking about the rich man, that we all like to think that we're doing anything, you know, and it's like, it's all God. The question is just, are you going to let him use you? Yeah. And so if you don't know, like you were saying, if you don't know the words that he's saying, if you don't know the promises he's made, if you don't know, and you can't know that if you're not getting into it. And I would say too, on top of that, I think it's easy to feel like, because we know ourselves, I think we like to think we know ourselves better than God does.
Yeah.
And so I think you get to that moment of like, well, God couldn't be calling me. I'm a mess. And it's like, I am a mess. I'll just admit that. You guys don't have to. I'll take that bullet for our podcast. But the things that God has done in my life and the doors that he's opened, even when I was a mess, you know, it's like, you don't have to be perfect because God sees you as perfected.
Yeah.
And that's hard to, I think, realize and truly understand and walk in. But that he knows the calling he's placed on you. And if you're willing to follow that, even when you don't feel like you deserve it or like you're good enough right now, I think I would challenge people who maybe are having those kinds of decisions right now. Like, God is calling you. He's calling you. Don't look at yourself, you know, look at God, because he sees you different than you see yourself.
Agreed. Good. What?
I'm waiting for you to stir it up.
I have nothing to stir up. I don't
just flashing between your cameras.
Yeah.
There, so.
All right, I'll go.
All right, Luke. Boy.
So the 10 Commandment thing.
Yeah.
Bro, that was brilliant.
Wow.
How I just like, Jesus is such a ninja.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's just so, like, you were brilliant for finding it. Obviously, he was more brilliant for saying, like, he set this guy up.
Yeah.
Like 1-2 punch. He knew what was about to happen.
Yeah.
And pointed out that this thing was an idol.
Yeah.
Like his riches, his security, his certainty, all those kinds of things. And whether it's money or something else, like we are, I forgot who was it, Josh, you might remember, but we are idol factories. Like as human beings, we are idol factories.
big.
Whether we are our idol or our kids are our idol or our kids' sports are our idol or our kids' sports that we hope they can live out because we weren't good enough becomes like all of those things and so many more become our idol. Like what do you guys personally do to help identify what has become an idol in your life? How do you deal with it? Who do you invite in? Like what does that look like for you guys?
It's a good question. I think things that you knowingly are robbing, like time. I don't know if that makes sense. But like, it forces you to neglect other things. For me, that's the birthplace of a problem.
Yeah.
I would say. Yeah.
What would you mean by robbing you of time? Like time that you should be doing something else?
Yeah, like if you, yes. I think we're all, most people, some people probably aren't, but most people I think have a pretty good grasp on what they should be spending their time doing.
Yeah.
Sure.
Like I should be spending my time doing X, Y, or Z. Believe it or not, most people who aren't believers wouldn't pick spending time with God, but there's probably relationships that get neglected. And it's like, what are the important things? What are you choosing to cheat, essentially? I think that's to me, the time thing is a red flag. Like, where is my time going? And am I okay with that? Yeah, that's a big thing.
Yeah, and I think the next question is, why are you okay with that?
Yeah,
You know,
like, am I okay? And then why would I be okay?
Yeah.
With that.
Because especially, like we're talking about time with God. Well, I don't spend time with God. Okay, why is that okay?
Yeah.
I don't know. Right.
Yeah.
And that's a hard question to ask and answer, but I think it is a question that a lot of people don't ask because, and you guys, I know at the previous church I was in, we tried to have like home groups. It was a smaller church. Tried to have home groups and things like that. Nobody would come because they had sports or whatever. And it's like, why are you okay with this? And I'm sure we have similar problems in our church here where people won't join a group because I don't have time that night or whatever. It's like,
Oh yeah, I mean, and now we're starting to live in a culture where nothing is sacred. Like there's no, Sundays is no longer like a sacred day. Like businesses, even when I was a kid, nothing was open on Sundays. Sundays were horrible. Like Taco Bell was open because everybody's closed on Sunday. That has shifted so much, and now sports will even be played on Sunday mornings. Like club teams, travel teams, and these kids are like 10 years old. And it's like, they're not going anywhere with this thing. It is not going to happen.
Yeah.
But I think we consistently will put our kids, I guess, entertainment above church.
Yeah.
And it's an uncomfortable conversation that people don't really like to have, but it's a real thing. I remember growing up, I never was allowed to play Pop Warner football. They told me it was too expensive, but I knew that was BS. It was because it was on Sundays, like Sunday mornings. I would never be able to go. I was at church.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think a lot of it comes from, I know as Christians, like we believe in eternity, we believe in heaven, but I don't think anybody puts any stock in that, because everything is about this life. I got to make sure I'm comfortable here.
Yeah.
And it's like in eternity, 10 million years into eternity, you're going to look back and be like, I probably shouldn't have played football. But it's so hard to, and that's such a difficult thing. And I think why this is kind of always that recurring problem, because it's so easy to look back and be like, man, I should have done differently. But it's so hard in the moment to still be doing that same mistake. And I mean, you see this with like addiction and everything, because when you're in it, it's so much harder to have that perspective. But when you get past it or look back on it, it's like, it would have been so easy. It would have been so easy. What do you think kind of causes that part of it? Because I think that's a big key of it, is in the moment it seems so hard. And then when you look back on it, you realize that's a big key of it, is in the moment it seems so hard. And then when you look back on it, you realize how minor an issue was or how easy it would have been. And how do we get past that?
I think, I think we've seen the T-shirt before, the hashtag like faith over feelings. I think it's the opposite. Like we worship our feelings.
Yeah.
And idols are for, either we trust in them, we hope in them, or we cope with them. So trust, hope, and cope. Like, because we coddle our own feelings when we're feeling stressed or anxious or worried or excited or social or whatever, like we naturally will often go to our idol, to the thing, right?
Yeah.
And an idol is meant to be fueled, worshipped. And we will worship it, like Josh said, with our time, talent, treasure, like whatever kind of acronym you want, or alliteration you want to use. And it's amazing, to your point, like mine, I will pick a new hobby like once a year, and it's my new way to cope.
Yeah.
And as soon as I get good at it, it's boring.
Right.
So the next year I have to pick a new one. So mine this year is hunting.
Oh, it took you this long to get to hunting?
Yeah, because I've just been busy with my other ones.
Okay.
But I've gotten great at all of them.
bet.
So, so it's hunting. But what's interesting about the hunting community is you've got these like primarily blue collar, like hard nosed dudes that are willing to get up at 4:30 in the morning to walk out in the middle of the woods in the dark, in the cold, to climb a tree with a loaded weapon, and then sit up there for 4 hours in the freezing cold in absolute silence.
Pass.
Like, it actually sounds very monastic, actually.
Oh, true. Yeah.
So why is it that personally, some of these guys I've been inviting to small group for years? They're like, it's so early. It's so early.
Yeah.
It's so early. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But, you know, and I'm not faulting anybody, but what I'm saying is, and even for myself, like the past couple mornings, I have sacrificed my time in scripture to be in a tree stand. Now, I've built up enough foundation that I'm praying and meditating and those kinds of things. But like, even I am feeling the grip of a hobby occupy my mind, my time, my money.
Yeah.
And it just, and now I'm asking myself, because I go through this cycle, like, what am I coping with?
Right.
What am I using this to cope with? What am I not dealing with?
Yeah, I think that urge for a lack of discomfort leads to such discomfort also. Because, it's absolutely a coping thing.
And I also think it's going back on just that thought of like identifying idols and things like that. I think it's sometimes I feel like it's hard for us to admit that we have idols, which makes it hard for us to remove it.
Yeah.
And you hear it in other spaces where they say, admission is the first step.
It is, yeah.
And so I think when you, and that's why, going back to your point, going about even reading the Bible, when you read the Bible and you're spending time with Jesus, it's hard to hide, right? It's almost impossible to hide. And we see it multiple times in the Bible. One is here with the story of the rich young ruler. There's another with the woman at the well. She comes and Jesus kind of, it's almost like you said, he's like, I say he's so smooth with it. And that's the way it's like this guy's just so smooth. He just asks one question and it's like, you don't have 4 husbands, you have 5. And the one you know with now is not, like, gosh, like it's impossible to hide. And that to me, that's why I feel like it's so important to read your word, because they said the Bible is the only thing that you just don't read, but it reads you. And as you're reading it, you can't escape the truth.
Yeah.
And that's what really challenges you. That's what pushes you. That's what makes you realize, and even to the point of realizing that, like, this was even as I'm going through the sermon and trying to like map it out and stuff like that. And that's when it hit me. I'm like, this whole time I'm thinking it's about what will you give? But no, the key is it's in what you won't give. That's the test. And the thing, even when it comes to identifying idols, to your question, Luke, about like, how do you identify it? A lot of times it's not identified until it's tested. Yeah. And when it's tested, because you may sincerely believe you're good, and like everything is cool, and I don't have any idols, and it's like, okay. And I said this during a message at some point, I forget which service, but it's like the test is coming, and when the test comes, that's when you see. And that's when I talked about Abraham as well.
Yeah.
It was like God in the Bible, it says, God tested Abraham. It's a test, and I think that's the beautiful things. The beautiful thing about tests. Tests will show where you're at. Yeah. And Jesus is just like the ultimate. He knows what buttons to press. Like, okay, and the last thing I'll mention on is that oftentimes, and not often, all the time, like God already knows. He just needs you to see. Because a lot of times we don't change until we see it. Yeah. And when he puts it in your face like that, it's like, wow. Like, sheesh. And again, you can't hide. You can, and that's probably one of the major things I love.
Well, this actually leads in. So Jay Dilla in the chat actually put up a question. I think this really feeds right into it. So his question is, he says, what about for a season ministry might be going to your kids' football games? You could have a conversation at a game that maybe wouldn't happen at church because that person doesn't attend. And so how do you balance that? And I think this kind of gets into that. Is like, is that an idol? Is that, or are you justifying like, oh, I can go to football, or is there some truth to that? And where are the trade-offs? So do you guys have any thoughts on that comment? Josh?
Yeah, sure do. I mean, yeah, just because it's a good thing doesn't mean it's the best thing. Just because it could be a good thing doesn't mean it's the best thing. I wouldn't sacrifice. When you can choose the ideal scenario, I would choose the ideal scenario. The ideal scenario is that my family grows up loving Jesus and loving church. And for me, the mind of my kids, their minds are way too malleable until they're about 15.
50.
That I refuse to sacrifice how they view. I would, for lack of a better way to say, I heard a guy who was pastoring a church for he was 20 years in. So you can say things when you're pastoring for that long and get away with it. But he's like, we're not watching your kids back in the kids ministry. We're brainwashing them. And I just feel like there's even already, like my son will say things that he hears in school, and I'm just like, man, this is gonna get wild in a few years. And like I've talked to other friends who they're in it. Like middle school is so different now than it used to be. And for me, it's like, it's a non-negotiable. So for me, it's like, am I missing out on a couple conversations at a Pop Warner game? Probably. I'm cool with it. Catch me at Wegmans. I'll talk to the cashier. But for me, I want to know that my kids, this has become such a normal part of their everyday life that they don't even realize that it's a thing that people don't always do. Like, I want them to go into conversations assuming that people, like, where do you go to church? I'd rather that question than never come up. So Wes already has the weirdest, I almost could stop him from doing it at school. It's like he's so innocent about it. So he'll just ask his teachers, do you guys love Jesus? Like, I'll ask them, and they like don't even know what to do with that. And then he has full conversations with his teachers and his classmates about church, because for him it's just just normal. And I'd rather that than like, I didn't stick the A gap today like I should have. Like I just don't like I guess I just don't have. And plus he's small, I'm small. He's never going to get a scholarship for sport.
So if you can get a scholarship, it is okay.
You won't know that he can get a scholarship until he's 15 or 16 and playing on varsity. So, like, I don't know. Maybe I've got such a very odd cultish view of.
I don't think so, because there are plenty of nominal Christians. Like, it's still it's still the religion of America. So there's plenty of nominal Christians. Like, I believe in God. Yeah, I'll go on Easter and Christmas. Yeah. But it is a whole nother thing to have what you said. Like, we want our kids passionately in love with Jesus and his church, because Jesus loves his church. And if football, this, that, the other thing, Sunday sauce, breakfast in your PJs, Sunday brunch, if that's getting in the way and jeopardizing loving Jesus and loving his church, then it probably needs to be sacrificed or surrendered. Right? Because church, like, the opportunities we have to witness and love people outside of the church service far outweighs when church is on.
Well, and I think too, I mean, it gets back to what we were saying about standards. I think that is a standard, is that yeah, you can say like, oh, I'm doing this and it's helping others, but at what cost to your own relationship with God? Like you were saying, Josh, of having that. And how impactful can that be? Why aren't they playing football? Because of church? I think if we get caught up in, I think it's easy to get caught up in that, like, oh, imagine all the great things that can happen. You might not see any.
Yeah.
There may be nothing, but it's not about the results. It's about the standard, and it's about what you've been called to do, and what God kind of puts on you, and just living to that. Because ultimately, like we're all saying here, it ultimately is about that relationship with God and that love towards God. Yeah. And if that's driving your actions, I think this might not even be a question, because to me, it sounds like it's the same thing. It's a temptation, that rationalization of, oh, I can do this. Yeah. I'm okay to do this.
And I'm not anti-football.
No, and we're not saying we need to be.
I think I'm anti like 8-year-olds playing tackle football. I mean, my gosh, CTE is a thing. But
we're not trying to be religious about it.
Yeah.
No.
Like, if you go on vacation, you don't have to go to church at some random town that you're staying in.
Yeah.
No, you have to.
You don't have to go to the chapel when you're at like Paradise Island.
Yeah. Unless it's a really nice chapel and you want to just check it out. But
sure.
Yeah. I'm not like church at all costs, but I don't want to put my family in a position where we're consciously choosing a season where we're saying, hey, it's okay for this season that we're actually not going to attend church because of this other commitment that's there. That, to me, puts both of them on the same playing field, and I just don't think that is the best way. But can people do that? Sure. Like, we're not going to make you sign on a dotted line that you're never going to do Pop Warner football with your kids, obviously, or like do club soccer. I would just tread lightly in that area, because your kids are like sponges to the culture around them. Now, I think more than ever, because social media, I mean, when I was a kid, I didn't have a cell phone until I was 16, and it wasn't a smartphone.
Yeah.
And I just can't even fathom. Like, zero choices until you're 18.
If I could even throw in there, I think it's also important in cases like this, the community that's around you is important. Right, because the question was brought up, and now you have Josh, and you have Luke, you have us talking about it from a different perspective, right? And so it's easy to reason, like you said, like with yourself. I mean, we can make anything make sense. We can justify it. Like, it's a good thing. That's why I'm doing it. Back at home, I'm not sure what the nightlife is like out in Rochester.
It's very similar to New York City.
Already. The Rochester
you out.
Almost exact the same. Yeah.
Some would say better.
Some would say better. Oh, okay.
Our subway system in the summer is just unbelievable.
But we would have, there's like some young adults back in the city who, it's Friday night or whatever. Like, oh, no, I'm going to the club, the minister. To who? Stop it. Really?
Yeah.
And so it's like, and you can make it make sense to yourself, but then you bring it around people, and we'll tell you straight up, stop it.
Yeah.
That's we call it cap. Like, that's cap. That's not, like, stop it. And so again, when you in that community of people, they could kind of check you, and then you can go against that, but you recognize what you're doing. Like I said, especially when you dealing with Jesus and you really trying to follow him, it's hard to hide. So,
that's like, even like for my personality, I wouldn't be if I was at my kid's soccer game, I would be a belligerent person. I just would be. Like,
That's true.
I wouldn't be ministering at all. I would hate the other team.
You'd be a bad witness.
It would be bad. I can't, I used to play spike ball before I seriously injured myself in such a bad way. So I'll never do that again. But it's like, maybe it's an unsanctified part of who I am, but I get so obsessively competitive that I just stop. I don't even think about anything else other than murdering the person that I'm playing against.
Yeah, you might want to look into that.
And it's just like, not physically murder, but just like,
No, you gotta
with your
them.
words.
Yes, you have to beat and with my words. Oh yes. I mean, you've been in situations. We played spike ball one time. You had no idea how to play.
No idea.
And it just
played decent. Got Josh
it just
angry.
switches. It just switches.
Well, competition is 90% mental.
Yeah,
so it's all
10%
about
using your head. It's just all it is. Yeah. So anyway, I can't get into this whole like it's my ministry expression. It's like, if you're anything like me,
Not a good idea.
yeah. But hey, maybe people are wired different. But
Yeah.
I grew up in a small town with football, and I can promise you, most people are the same. But you know what's interesting about the eye of the needle thing? Did you know this? And when he said it's harder for a rich man, you did know?
No. I'm saying I know the scripture.
Yeah. No, yeah. But after it, he says like it's harder for a rich man to go through the eye of a needle. Now, obviously, it's impossible for a camel to go through the eye of a needle. Like that is actually impossible. But in that time, so when Jesus, and you talked about it, he said, first go sell all your possessions and then come follow me. The eye of a needle was actually a narrow gate to the city of Jerusalem. And for a camel to go through that, it would have to actually get down, basically almost crawl through. But the person owning the camel would have to take off all the baggage from the camel before the camel went through the eye of the needle. So all of the listeners, when Jesus turned and been like, it's harder for a rich man to enter the kingdom of heaven than it is for a camel to go through the eye of a needle, they all would have instantly thought of that gate and someone taking all the baggage off of the camel so the camel could get through. And that is brilliant. See, that dude, the guy was quick.
Yeah.
He was quick, because then it's like, oh my God. And we're, I would say, more wealthy now in so many other areas than they were then with our time and the things we can do. And it's actually harder for a wealthy person to get into the kingdom of heaven because there's so many things we don't want to remove from our lives in order to have, we want to take anything with us that gives us some semblance of like normalcy and like, this is just something my family likes to do together. And it's like, okay, well, it's easier for a camel to get to the eye of a needle than a rich man to get to the kingdom of heaven.
I'm so mad that I didn't come across that because
That's why we got this show.
I love it. Because I feel like it even further confirms the point of we try to follow God with full hands.
Yeah.
And have hearts.
Yeah.
And he's like, you can't, like, there's just some places I'm going to call you to.
Yeah.
Those full hands can't come.
Yeah.
And you're going to have to drop those things. You're going to have to remove those things out the way. Good luck trying to follow God like that.
Yeah.
And so, no, I love that. Man, I'm mad at him.
I'll talk about it this weekend. I'm going to do a message on giving.
That's great, Josh.
Yeah.
Well, on that note, I do think it is time to wrap it up.
Sweet.
But thank you guys for joining, for talking. Church, we are starting the Christmas season this Sunday. You heard it here first. Josh is going to be talking on giving. I don't think that was serious.
Christmas
He is going to be preaching, though.
I am preaching on Christmas.
Yeah.
Great. So we're looking forward to that tomorrow, first Wednesday, with prayer at 6 beforehand. Or we?
Yep. Prayer from 6 to about 6:30. And then all three of us are going to be participating in the content tomorrow.
Four of us.
Oh, yes.
Oh,
Gordon.
Hey, come see me in the flesh, talking to people. It's going to be fun. We hope to see you all there, church. We hope to see you on Sunday as we start this Christmas time. We're excited. Church, we love you. Have a great week. We'll see you tomorrow.